Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cluster briefing on amended lockdown regulations has just wrapped up. Also watching that, let's get you more reaction from the Institute for Security Studies. Gareth, Newham, a very good afternoon to you. Let's start with the two big takeouts if we can. It's going to be a lot tougher when it comes to enforcement, when it comes to the wearing of masks, and also the police minister really clamping down on the illegal sale and transportation of alcohol. To be expected, I suppose.
Yes, I don't think anything new or unexpected. This was very much the approach during the first 5 weeks of the lockdown. And I think as the lockdown regulations eased up a bit, we've seen the police operations also recede a little bit. They also, as was mentioned by the minister, battling with over 7,000 police officers having contracted the virus and around 5,000 of them still in quarantine or isolation. So they did pull back a little bit, but I think this briefing showed that they're going to step up those operations to ensure that the regulations are now being adhered to, particularly in areas where we're seeing big increases in the transmission of the virus.
7,000 cases confirmed within the South African Police Service. Would there be a concern about capacity to enforce, given that those who are tasked with enforcement are also suffering?
I think not at this moment. We do have around 150,000 trained and active police officers. So right now, 2,000 of those have already recovered, are probably back on duty. So we're looking at around 5,000, a very small proportion of the total number of police officers. They're also able to call on reservists. So I don't think at this point you'll see that this will have a significant impact on policing operations. And if it gets worse, I would imagine they will move police officers out of provinces or areas where there's very low transmission rates into the areas where they really want to keep or ensure that compliance to regulations is taking place.
Gareth Newham, more roadblocks, a lot more law enforcement on the road. The police minister also talking about random stop and search operations. Again, while this is important, there is always the concern about police exceeding their remit.
Indeed, I think that is the key issue for the police. The police can't be everywhere, and they can't police all 60 million people who live in South Africa at the moment. So really what they need to do is focus their resources very carefully to particular areas and hotspots and locations or groups of people or networks where they think the biggest challenge might be. But ideally what happens is that every engagement the police officer has with a member of the public is designed not only to ensure that there's compliance, but to build trust in the police. Because research in South Africa and internationally for many decades shows that if people trust the police, they're more likely to adhere to laws and regulations. If people don't trust the police, they're less likely to adhere to laws and regulations. And when the police are seen as brutal or corrupt or lack motivation or disinterested in people's rights, then public trust does decline. So it is important that they do not exceed their powers and that they use every opportunity at these roadblocks, at these various operations with the public to build trust. And that's quite simple. It's about being professional, polite, explaining what you're doing, and you only really use force or arrests as a very last measure, long after you've tried other measures.
Let's talk about that trust quotient if we can. Day 111 into the lockdown. Previously, there have been reports on police brutality in South Africa. I think it was the police minister himself who said that there were 49 cases reported at the start of the lockdown. Now, he said that some 2 weeks ago, so I'm assuming that might have increased slightly. Is there an issue here in terms of that trust quotient? Has it eroded in any way?
Well, it's difficult to say in the more recent past. So some of the research that we have looked at doesn't suggest a big shift really between people's trust levels before and after the lockdown started at the end of March. I think we saw a high level of concern and media reporting of police brutality in the first few weeks. That seemed to have resulted in some shifts in police conduct. But if you look at the bigger picture, we have seen over the last 7 to 8 years, in fact longer, that there have been declining overall levels of trust and approval of the South African Police Service. And that has to do with issues of too many police officers being involved in corruption, too many police officers misusing their powers and being brutal. So it's a long-term challenge that the police face. And I think that would have meant that they've got an uphill battle to climb. But these operations, as I say, can always be used as an opportunity to change things around. So as long as the police leadership recognize that, it could go a long way to really building trust, which has been otherwise declining for a number of years now in the police.
Are you monitoring or keeping track of SANDF deployment, particularly after early claims of heavy-handedness and still no resolution to the Collins Causa case?
Well, it's very difficult to do that because they don't release information on the numbers or where they are deploying SANDF soldiers. So unless we get specific reports of people in communities where they've seen soldiers or where it's reported on the media that there's been military deployment, it's not possible for us outside of government or outside of the security cluster to really know how many soldiers are being deployed where. But there has been some indication that following the Collins Causa death, although it hasn't been resolved adequately and satisfactorily yet, that there were changes in the way the SANDF were being briefed. And certainly in Alexander, they tended to change their approach. So I think they quite quickly realized that if they had any more incidents like this, it could really turn the public against the SANDF. And the SANDF has a much higher overall approval rating than the police. So they didn't want to go down that path, I think.
Just a quick one in conclusion. I was curious about the word motivation that you used as far as the SAPS is concerned. Is that or could that become a longer-term problem the longer this lockdown continues for?
Yes, I think the longer the police have to enforce regulations that are not always popular amongst the public, where a lot of the public don't agree or adhere to the regulations, it's going to be an added burden. Because all the laws, criminal laws, that they still have to be involved in enforcing, and the Minister mentioned that there has been increases in crime and violence as the lockdown levels became more open. These regulations are trying to control behaviors that most people don't see as problematic. So if you're a smoker, you don't think buying cigarettes should be illegal. You drink alcohol, you feel the same way. People don't think that visiting their family should be banned. And there are a lot of concerns that certain sectors are being favoured, such as the taxi association. So while you have that problem, it's going to be very difficult for the police to maintain that level of compliance. And that's why I say it's so important and more important that the police use every opportunity that they have to build trust in them, because if they do that and people see them trying to do a difficult job under difficult circumstances but doing it well, professionally, and providing assistance and support to members of the public, then that's the best chance they have of ensuring that there's greater compliance. Threats of arrests, threats of use of force will not do that, and we know that from many decades in South Africa that doesn't work.
Gareth Newham from the Institute for Security Studies, thank you very much.